The pursuit of knowledge begins here. Welcome to Inquisitio. The 1st of November, 1755. All Saints' Day. Lisbon wakes beneath a gentle autumn sun, calm, almost warm. It is one of the holiest days of the year, and the city fills its churches. Thousands of candles burn before the altars. Families wear their finest clothes. The air smells of incense and melting wax. Lisbon is, at this moment, one of the richest and most powerful cities in Europe. Its wealth, fed by the gold arriving from its colonies, had turned it into one of the most opulent capitals on the continent. Its cathedrals were among the most beautiful in the Christian world. And then, at 9:40 in the morning, the earth draws a deep breath. For a few seconds, nothing makes sense. The ground, the firmest, most certain thing in human existence, begins to move. The walls of the churches, where thousands were praying, ripple as though made of water. And in less than 10 minutes, the most devout city in Europe will be reduced to rubble. But what followed that morning did not destroy only a city. It shook something far deeper, the way an entire civilization believed the world worked. Because when the dust settled, the question left hanging in the air was not how to rebuild Lisbon. It was, how could this happen? It all began with a sound. Survivors described it in different ways. A subterranean thunder, the groan of 1,000 doors opening at once. It came from below. It came from everywhere. Today, we know what was happening. On the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of kilometers southwest of Cape St. Vincent, a geological fault had just given way. The energy released was colossal. Today, it is estimated at a magnitude between 8.5 and 9.0 on the moment magnitude scale. To put that in perspective, it releases more energy than thousands of atomic bombs, all in a single instant. The first tremor lasted little more than a minute. It was enough to open fissures meters wide in the heart of the city. But it was what came next that sealed Lisbon's fate. Because the earthquake did not strike once. It struck 3 times. First, the earth. The churches, packed for All Saints' Day, were among the first to fall. Stone ceilings collapsed onto the kneeling faithful. In seconds, places of prayer became tombs. Then, the fire. The thousands of candles lit for the holy day toppled onto wood, fabric, and tapestry. Small flames became blazes, and the blazes joined into a firestorm that swept the city for 5 days. The heat was so intense, it is said to have melted marble. And those who fled the flames ran to the one place that seemed safe, the river. Thousands gathered on the banks of the Tagus, away from the buildings, away from the fire. And it was then that they noticed something impossible. The waters of the river were drawing back, leaving the riverbed exposed, revealing lost boats and cargoes that had sunk decades before. Those standing there had no way of knowing what it meant. About 40 minutes later, the sea returned, not as a wave, as a wall. The first of 3 tsunamis rose over the Tagus and swallowed everything in its path. Those who had escaped the earth and the fire were carried away by the water. In less than 2 hours, the 4th largest city in Europe had ceased to exist. To understand what the earthquake destroyed, one must understand what Europe believed before it. In the 18th century, a comforting idea prevailed, that the world was ordered and governed by an attentive providence. The philosopher Leibniz had captured this view in a famous phrase, that we lived in the best of all possible worlds. Everything that happened, however painful, had a purpose within a greater and benevolent plan. And then a holy day destroyed the most devout city in Europe. At the very moment thousands were at prayer. The question fell upon European thought as the city itself had fallen. If the world was governed by a just providence, how could this be explained? Why had the churches collapsed upon the faithful, while certain districts of ill repute were left partly standing? No thinker embodied that revolt like Voltaire. Profoundly shaken, he wrote a poem about the Lisbon disaster that was, in effect, a direct attack on the idea of the best of all possible worlds. To him, to gaze upon that ruin and still insist that all was well was a cruelty against those who suffered. Later, the echo of Lisbon would run through his most famous work, where he mocked without mercy the optimism that tried to justify the unjustifiable. But there was a second voice, which answered differently. Rousseau did not blame the heavens. He blamed mankind. He argued that nature had not asked for thousands of houses to be built crowded together, several stories high, one on top of another. Had people lived more spread out, closer to nature, the disaster would have cost far fewer lives. Without knowing it, Rousseau was pointing to something deeply modern. The idea that the scale of a catastrophe depends not only on the natural event, but on the human choices that precede it. It was the beginning of a rupture. For the first time on a large scale, Europe began to seek the causes of its tragedies, not in the heavens, but in the earth, not in divine will, but in plates, in structures, in decisions. The ground had trembled beneath Lisbon, but something had also trembled inside the mind of an entire civilization. While the philosophers debated the heavens, one man busied himself with the earth. His name would pass into history as the Marquis of Pombal, and in the hours following the disaster, he became, in practice, the master of Lisbon. It is said that, asked what should be done in the face of the chaos, he answered with a phrase that says it all: bury the dead and care for the living. There was no time for mourning. Pombal imposed order with an iron hand. He had the bodies buried quickly to prevent epidemics. He stopped the population from fleeing so that hands would remain to rebuild. He suppressed looting without hesitation. He was harsh, but it worked. Lisbon did not sink into the prolonged chaos that usually follows a catastrophe of this kind. But the truly revolutionary act was another, and it went almost unnoticed at the time. Pombal sent a questionnaire to every parish in the kingdom. How long did the tremor last? In what direction did the buildings move? Did the sea draw back before it advanced? Did the animals behave strangely before the shock? For the first time, instead of asking whose fault it was, people asked what had happened, and they sought the data. Those answers, preserved to this day, made it possible to reconstruct the event with an accuracy never seen before. It is why many consider the Lisbon earthquake the birth of modern seismology. The science of the earth began, in part, with that questionnaire. And when the time came to rebuild, Lisbon did not rise again at random. The new downtown was designed with wide, straight streets, and the buildings were given an internal timber framework conceived to withstand future tremors, the so-called Pombaline cage. It was, quite possibly, one of the first earthquake-resistant systems in the world. The city was not merely rebuilt, it was rethought. The earthquake of 1755 killed tens of thousands of people and erased a city from the map. But what remained was far greater than what was lost. What remained was a new way of looking at the world. Before Lisbon, a catastrophe was a punishment or a mystery. After Lisbon, it became something else as well, a problem. Something that can be studied, understood, and perhaps prepared for. The difference seems small, but it is one of the great turning points in human thought. It is the passage from fear to inquiry. Today, every time a seismograph records a tremor, every time a building is made to move without falling, every time a coastline is warned of an approaching wave, there is a distant echo of that November morning. The world learned, in the hardest way, to ask a different question. Lisbon fell. But from its fall was born something that goes on saving lives, almost 300 years later. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson of all, that sometimes it is from the very ground crumbling beneath our feet that the most solid foundation of the future is born. If you enjoy stories that quietly changed the way we see the world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there is so much more to explore. Leave a comment below with what surprised you most in this story. Because here, curiosity never sleeps, and there is always more to discover.